What's up, everybody? Welcome into the Next Pats podcast. I'm Phil Perry. We've got a great episode lined up for you this week because we are talking all things Bailey Zappe. Yes, that's right. Patriots rookie quarterback taken in the fourth round of this year's draft. We've had a chance to take in a couple of practices. We've had a chance to see Bailey Zappe zip it around a little bit. We've seen him get coached up by Joe Judge and Bill Belichick at times. And I figured this would be a good time to try to learn a little bit more about him. Why were the Patriots so enamored with him that even though they had Mac Jones on the roster going into just his second season, they felt as though this was the right move for them in the fourth round, especially considering where they took Bailey Zappe was really considered the meat of this year's draft. We talked about it all leading up to this year's draft. Yes, there was a certain tier of player that was going to be available at the very top of the draft, maybe the first 10, 12 picks. Then really all the way through the second round, you could find some really good players. But then all the way into the fourth, Daniel Jeremiah and others told us you'll find starters there. And when the Patriots picked at 137 overall, and they ended up taking Zappe, here are some of the names that were still left on the board. The very next pick, the Pittsburgh Steelers took Calvin Austin Jr., the receiver out of Memphis, very undersized. Almost Marcus Jonesian in terms of his frame, light, short, but an incredible athlete. That's actually not just coming up with that off the top of my head. I won't separate my shoulder, patting myself on the back here, but that's not a terrible comp. Calvin Austin's sort of the offensive version of Marcus Jones. Some upside there because of his athleticism. A few picks later, the Packers take Zach Tom, who I think is going to play guard at the next level out of Wake Forest, somebody that we mocked to the Patriots at least once during the build-up to the draft, but somebody who could potentially play all five positions at the next level. Really good athlete. Some other names a little bit further down. Khalil Shakir, the receiver out of Boise State, who ends up going to the Bills. Thomas Booker, the defensive tackle out of Stanford, who goes to Houston, but somebody who was clearly a Patriots fit as well. And no surprise that he ends up going into Caserio. Tariq Woolen, the 6'4", but blazing fast corner out of UTSA. So there was real talent. Zion McCollum, the freaky athlete, another corner with great size and unbelievable movement skills. He's still on the board. He ends up going at 157. So a full 20 picks later after Bailey Zappe. And yet this is the choice the Patriots made. Why? And we asked that question at the time, and we got some interesting answers back from NFL folks and did some reporting leading up to the draft for our Prototypical Patriots series, the quarterback installment there. We had some really good information from people on Bailey Zappe even before the Patriots took him. So we will get to all that. We will refresh our thoughts on Bailey Zappe, but the first thing we want to do is we want to talk to Bailey Zappe's coach and mentor, really, at both Houston Baptist, where Zappe started his college career, and then at Western Kentucky, where he posted an absolutely historic season production-wise last year at Western Kentucky. It was under offensive coordinator Zach Kittley. He's now the offensive coordinator, quarterbacks coach at Texas Tech. This is going to be his first year. 2022 will be his first year at Tech, but he spent last year at Western Kentucky with Zappe. Helped get Zappe to Western Kentucky, despite Zappe getting interest from places like the University of Tennessee. So he had the ability, potentially, to end up at the SEC level in 2021, but he follows his coordinator from Houston Baptist to Western Kentucky. They're running that same offense. It's a seamless transition for him. And again, he has statistically the best season of any quarterback in college football last year. So without further ado, let's get Zach Kittley on the podcast right now. We'll talk some Bailey Zappe. All right, we're very excited now to have with us on Next Pats Zach Kittley, who is the offensive coordinator, quarterbacks coach at Texas Tech right now, but has a great relationship with new Patriots quarterback Bailey Zappe. He coached Bailey at Western Kentucky, also coached him at Houston Baptist. So, Zach, thanks so much for being with us here on the podcast.
Absolutely. Appreciate you guys having me on.
So I have to ask you first, what was your reaction when you saw that it was New England that had drafted Bailey just recently here? What did you think of the fit? What was your initial impression of that marriage?
Yeah, honestly, a little bit shocked at the jump, just because with Mac being there as a rookie last year and he had a heck of a year. Wasn't quite sure if the Pats would take one, but quickly after that, I realized that my guy's going to probably the greatest professional sports organization out there, and so that was awesome, and just fired up for him. He's worked so hard to get to where he's at. And, I think the Patriots are a really, really good fit for him.
Well, and it's interesting too, Zach, for our listeners, our audience that may not know much about your background, there's a little bit of a Patriots crossover in your career path, right? Where you were at Texas Tech. You're obviously there now, but you were there previously when Cliff Kingsbury was there. Do I have that right? Who obviously spent some time here in New England as well. So what do you know about the Patriots maybe through Cliff, and how do you think Bailey might kind of mesh with this offense that's been here for forever, really, ever since, even before Cliff Kingsbury was here in New England?
Yeah, I think the first thing that everybody kind of hears and knows about the Patriots is just the culture that they have there with New England, and what Coach Belichick has done there. It's really second to none. I think what you guys are going to get with Bailey Zappe is a blue collar, tough kid. And, so he really, and, I'm not just saying this, I feel like he really already is going to fit the culture there. I think he's going to really bring to the table what Patriots fans are looking for. I've already heard some good reports back from him that he's kind of the first guy in the building in the morning, one of the last guys to leave. Like I said, being here with Coach Kingsbury, who played there for the Patriots, just heard a lot of great stuff. I know he learned a lot, being in that organization, and he's clearly doing it really well right now in Arizona as well. So I know he's taken a lot of those things that he learned in his time there in New England, and he's putting it, his head coaching stamp on it as well there in Arizona.
Well, and I definitely want to ask you about your offense, the offense that you ran with Bailey for so many years at two different programs. But first, just want to ask you about your relationship with Bailey, because clearly it's pretty strong. I'm sure, you don't spend as much time together as you and Bailey must have over the years without having a strong bond there. But there was also this interesting point in Bailey's career where, he finishes his time at Houston Baptist. And I guess reportedly, there are other big time schools, Tennessee, Notre Dame, USC, I believe I read as well, all showed interest in him as potentially bringing him on as a transfer student. He ends up following you to Western Kentucky. So what does that say about the relationship that the two of you had? And just tell us how strong that bond was able to develop and the point that it got to after all those years together between you two.
Yeah, I mean, we're really, really tight. I was actually texting him very, very early this morning. He was already up and at him, and I was too here in Lubbock getting to work. Just checking in on him. Like I said, we're very, very tight. Like you said, we spent 4 years together, and we spent a lot of time together, just really getting to know each other. And I think that there's a lot of similarities in our personalities, how we were raised. You ask us, we're pretty simple guys. We feel like we're blue collar, tough, hardworking. You get what you work for kind of guys. And so we clicked immediately, on that front. And then, I think we were both just very good for each other. Him for me, really, that was my first full-time gig, as a 26-year-old play caller. But having a guy like him, with me to kind of go through the ups and downs. And then, the flip side, me being with him, coming off his freshman year, it was a tough year for him. And then really just bringing in my offense that really fit his skill set, because he's a professional and I coach it that way. And I think, clearly you saw him flourish in what we're doing offensively. And but yeah, we're really, really tight. His family is family to me. I believe I'm family to them as well. I got to be there on draft day with them, in Victoria at his house. So yeah, very, very strong relationship. He means a lot to me, and I know I would not be here where I'm at sitting in my desk here at Texas Tech without him. So, I'm very grateful for him for sure.
Well, very cool that you're able to be with him at that moment where he gets that phone call from the New England Patriots and is talking to Bill Belichick. Was everybody shocked? You mentioned your initial reaction was surprise, and it was here as well. They just draft Mac Jones. He has the best rookie season of any quarterback in the league last year. And they spend a real, fourth round. That's a valuable pick in the league. And so was everybody initially pretty surprised by that link, or had the Patriots shown enough interest in him over the course of time that it did make some sense?
I don't want to quote this, but I want to say that they had told him that they kind of had him in that third, fourth round grade coming in. But, I want to say it was probably kind of a shock to most of us. Like I said, again, with Mac being, one of the highly rated quarterbacks as a rookie the year before, we just were kind of expecting him to fall to somewhere else, to be honest, that had a little bit more of not maybe not a younger quarterback like Mac. But it was exciting. Like I said, I know for him, being able to be on the phone with Mr. Kraft and Coach Belichick was very special for him. And it was for all of us, just being able to be there in that moment.
So Zach, tell us a little bit about your offense and how things operated for you there, and what sort of principles and concepts you lean on, and how that might translate for Bailey moving forward, because obviously he knows that thing like the back of his hand. And I actually talked to a couple of quarterbacks coaches, one in particular. And it seemed as though, based on what I was told, that there were maybe one or two other quarterbacks in this year's draft class that played in similar offenses. And what I was told was nobody knows this offense the way Bailey knows it. I mean, you know what you're going. This was even before the Patriots drafted him. So teams knew what they were going to get in Bailey as far as his football IQ and his understanding of what he was doing on the field. It sounded like it was next level. But tell us a little bit about your offense and how that may translate for Bailey at the next level here.
Yeah, so we're very multiple. We're multiple personnels, multiple formations, a lot of motions. We do kind of have some of the base old school air raid passing concepts, but we're very multiple in the run game, all your zone stuff as well as all your gap scheme runs. We have quick game. We have our drop back passing. We're a lot more complex than people think. And so we do a lot. Clearly, we got a bad rap, and I know he was battling this going through the draft process with some people saying he's an air raid quarterback. All they have is a one-word call here and there and stuff like that. And that couldn't be further from the truth. I put a lot on his plate. And man, could he handle it all. It never mattered what situation we were in the game. We had Bailey Zappe back there, so we knew we had a chance to win the game. Especially when you have a guy like that too. My philosophy is it's not necessarily so much about play calls. It's about your players. And I had a couple freaky receivers, and then we had the best quarterback in the country. So why not put the ball in their hands? And so that's what we did. But no, what we did offensively is going to really translate for Bailey. And I think people that interviewed him in the draft process, as I know the Patriots did, really saw that. And I think that jumped off the charts to them. His football IQ is really, really high. He has a great understanding of defenses, and that's the full package, fronts, coverages, blitz IDs, all that stuff. And he's going to be able to get you to the right play. And that's the biggest thing that I do in my offense. And like I said, I coach it like it's a pro style. You don't see Tom Brady and Peyton Manning and the greats, Drew Brees, those guys getting up there. And if it's a bad play call, they just keep the play call on. You see them audibling and getting to different plays. And because at the end of the day, that's how the position should be played, in my opinion. And countless times this last year, Bailey did just that. Maybe I didn't make the greatest play call, but he knew what to get into whenever those play calls weren't great, and he does a phenomenal job at that. So I see zero issues of him transitioning into that because he had a lot on his plate for us, as I know he will there in New England.
Well, when you hear all that, the responsibilities he had, at the line of scrimmage, being able to get his team into the right play, and hearing just the breadth of offense that you ran, where you're talking all sorts of different run game concepts, pass game concepts. I mean, you could see now why the Patriots would value him as they did and be willing to take him as high as they did, maybe even as high as the third round. But then he slips to the fourth. They probably look at it and say, I mean, he's too good for us to pass on him here. We have a quarterback, but that position is incredibly valuable, as we all know. And it sounds like he fits what they're looking for to a T. And you can even read, and we did this with Mac Jones last year, but you can read, some old scouting notes from Bill Belichick's time with the Browns, and he'll describe things that he's looking for in a quarterback. And Mac Jones checks a lot of those boxes, but Bailey Zappe checks a lot of those boxes too. So you understand why they would value him as they did. I do want to ask you about one comparison, Zach, that I saw you make in one article, but also Randy Miller, who was former general manager of the Saints and the Dolphins, made the same comparison in terms of the player. Both of you brought up Drew Brees' name when describing Bailey. So tell me what it is about Bailey's game that brings to mind Drew Brees, right? Nobody can predict, somebody's going to have a Hall of Fame career and set all sorts of records the way Drew Brees has. But what is it about Brees' game, which our audience knows really well, that Bailey seems to have some of those components of?
Yeah, competitor, leadership, the physical kind of similarities. Bailey's 6'1.5", 215, 220. You don't know exactly what Drew weighed, but I know he was in that 6 foot range, somewhere around there. And just his ability to, what made Drew so great is the same thing, man. His football IQ was through the roof. And he knew certain situations and where to get the ball. And I think they did a great job too of letting him be who he is and kind of be back there. And they threw the ball around a lot there for the Saints with him. And so that's why I really do. I see that in him. Kind of the underdog, blue collar, got a chip on his shoulder. I just see a lot of similarities, when you saw him on TV, just his tenacity, his aggressiveness, his leadership. I just see a lot of those things in Bailey. And I truly think that's a really good comparison for him moving forward.
Last thing I wanted to ask you, Zach, we've kept you longer than we were planning, so we appreciate the time that you're spending with us. Now we know it's still a busy time of year, even in the off season for you guys there at Texas Tech. But is there a story, all the time you spent with Bailey, is there a story that really sticks out in your mind in terms of when you think back to your time together and what kind of player he is, what kind of competitor he is, whether it's on the field in the moment or off the field, behind the scenes? Is there a story that first comes to mind for you that helps define who Bailey is?
Man, he just all the time, he always wanted to be first, like drill work in practice. There was going to be nobody that stepped in front of him that got the first rep. He was always going to be the guy that got the first rep. Just competitor all the time and everything he does. He's a big bowler. He likes to bowl, with his buddies. And I know he is a competitive bowler, with some of the teammates there at Western. And, but man, that's just who he is. Like I said, what you're going to get from him is you're going to get a guy that's going to work his tail off every day. He's going to want to compete. He's going to ask nothing to be given to him. And he just wants to win. At the end of the day, that's what it's all about. And that's really what sticks out to me. I could tell you multiple game scenarios whenever you knew we had something. He had one of the worst high ankle sprains I've ever seen in 2019 against South Dakota. Didn't practice one day all week. Came in against South Dakota, threw for over 500 yards, and we won the game on a 2-point conversion with a minute left, and we were 20-point underdogs. That's who he is, and he ended up playing the rest of the season on that bum ankle. Threw for almost 4,000 yards and almost 40 touchdowns. And that's just who he is. That's what you're going to get. You're never going to be able to hold him out. He's going to give you everything he's got every day of the week. And that's just who he is through and through.
Well, Zach Kittley, thanks so much for being with us here. Great to have nobody better really for us to learn from when it comes to figuring out more about Bailey Zappe as a player, as a person. I mean, the numbers that he put up when you guys were working together, almost 6,000 yards last year, 62 touchdowns. It is mind-boggling stuff what you guys were able to do together. So thanks so much for being with us here on Next Pats and sharing a little bit of what you know about Bailey Zappe.
Absolutely. Appreciate you guys.
All right, great stuff there from Zach. We really appreciate him coming on the podcast and sharing a lot of what he knows about Bailey Zappe with us right now. And he's doing the right things here in New England in his short time here thus far. If he's getting to the facility early and he's living in the playbook, it sounds like he's checking every quarterback intangible that there is. But that was what you heard about Zappe even before the Patriots drafted him. So here's what I can tell you. A quarterback's coach told me about Zappe. This was before the draft. He said he loves ball. great dude. His arm strength isn't good. That's rarely a deterrent for me, is what this coach told me. But the quote continues here. His is close to being too soft. Still, I love the kid, his intelligence, his decisions, his accuracy. He can be a functional backup. Now, that is setting a relatively low bar compared to what Kittley is telling us and what Randy Mueller is saying. Again, I mentioned this in the conversation with Zach, but this is what Mueller told the Athletic Football Show. This was ahead of the draft as well. He says, the best thing he does for me is he processes information. He was really impressive in that he could manipulate coverage in the secondary and throw people open. And that's a really hard thing for college kids to do. The quote continues, I thought he was able to do this from the pocket and on the run. And he goes on to say, I'm not saying this guy is Drew Brees at all, but I'm thinking stylistically, his throwing motion, his ability to get it out quickly, gave me a lot of similarities to where Drew was and how he did business. So, of course, you can't say that a 4th round pick any year is going to end up being Drew Brees. But stylistically, is that not what the Patriots are looking for? Drew Brees was a good athlete at the height of his powers and had the ability to move around and scramble a little bit, but he was, at the end of the day, a pocket quarterback who understands what defenses are trying to do with him, and he tries to manipulate coverage, and he throws on time, accurately. He throws people open. He's willing to test windows because he trusts that accuracy in his arm, even though his arm was never considered exceptionally strong. So I would say the strengths and the weaknesses there for Zappe and Brees match up. Again, we're not saying he's going to end up with a gold jacket the way Drew Brees will, but this is what the Patriots are generally looking for. And let's go back to that description that Bill Belichick laid out in his scouting notes for the Browns back in the 90s, which we've talked about ad nauseum here before drafts in the past. But I think it's a good reminder. This is what Bill Belichick told his scouts back when he was with the Browns, what he wanted in quarterbacks. Number one is to make good decisions. Then arm, size, physically tough, leadership, someone guys look up to and have confidence in. A real competitor. Accurate rather than a guy with a cannon. The emphasis on our game will be on decisions, timing, and accuracy. The guy needs to be confident. Intelligence is important, but not as much so as field awareness and judgment. He can't be sloppy fundamentally. He can't be an unsound guy with ball handling techniques, etc. His footwork, his drops, his release, all of those things had to be on point. The quarterback has to be able to throw the ball with accuracy, is how those notes finished up. And again, those are notes that were provided by Daniel Jeremiah a couple of years ago. He came across those, and we go to those every year. And Bill Belichick actually told us in a press conference this week when Tom Curran asked about those Daniel Jeremiah notes. He said, we update those every year, and we update how we value certain positions every year. But to me, when you look at that description, that is the description for Mac Jones. The emphasis on arm strength really isn't there. I mean, he does list it early in his description there, but he goes on to say, you have to be accurate before we care about arm strength. And I think Zappe is the same kind of quarterback. Will he be as good even as Mac Jones someday? I would tend to say no, because I would probably lean more towards, what this quarterback's coach, this is a team that was interested in quarterbacks this offseason. So he was doing his due diligence and then some on quarterbacks in this year's draft. I would probably lean more towards what he's saying, where, he is talking about the arm strength, but he's talking about the love of football and the intangibles. The comp that this coach brought up to me was Nick Mullins. Okay. And that to me makes sense. That's somebody that I think the Patriots probably would be interested in. And you know why I say that? Because Nick Mullins, ended up with the Vegas Raiders and Josh McDaniels and Dave Ziegler just this past offseason. He just signed with the Raiders a few months ago. And so they're obviously going to value the same things that Bill Belichick does in general, I believe, at that position. And so can Zappe do that? I do think he can. This is from Dane Brugler, our buddy. Again, another friend of the podcast with The Athletic. He says the offense that he ran at both Houston Baptist and Western Kentucky was ingrained in him. Zappe was a rhythmic decision maker in college and knew where to go with the football and how to stay on time. His average arm strength and inconsistencies when asked to anticipate or make full field reads will be tough to overcome against NFL speed. But overall, there's nothing necessarily explosive about his arms or legs, but Zappe has a natural feel for touch and trajectory with the mind/intangibles that will smooth his transition to the NFL. He projects favorably to Case Keenum, so there's another comp, and should be a long-time NFL backup and possible spot starter. So there you go. I think all of that is pretty consistent, whether you're hearing from Randy Mueller or Zach Kittley or the quarterbacks coach that I spoke to earlier this offseason or Dane Brugler. Everyone understands what his strengths and weaknesses are. And I think the reason you would feel good about the fact that he will do more in terms of highlighting his strengths and tamping down his weaknesses are some of the intangible comments that we hear about him, both from people who scouted him, who interviewed him this past season, but also from the coach who knows him best, and Zach Kittley, and hearing about all the things that he would do behind the scenes and just how competitive he is. I think you worry less about some of the physical, quote unquote, deficiencies he might have. And you say to yourself, as long as they are baseline level, as long as they are NFL acceptable, he might have a chance to overcome those because of everything else that he's willing to do, because of the effort he's going to put in behind the scenes, because of the competitiveness, because he is a smart player, because he ran an offense that I thought this was a great point for Kittley to bring up, because when you look at Kittley's background or when you see some of the passing numbers that Zappe put up, you say to yourself, well, this guy must be an air raid guy. So it's all shotgun. It's a lot of, I should say, short pass, catch and run type of stuff. When the reality is they were a very varied offense. And this was someone who was allowed to be given total control of that offense at the line of scrimmage. So again, it makes all kinds of sense as to why he would be a great Patriots fit. I felt that way at the time, putting together the prototypical Patriots piece, again, because of not only his traits, but because of where he was going to go in the draft. That's sort of where you would start thinking about the Patriots potentially rolling with a quarterback. But to hear so many smart people provide comps, even if it's Case Keenum or Nick Mullins, and it's more on that end of the spectrum than it is the Drew Brees end of the spectrum, there's value there. There's a lot of value there. And so in the fourth round, even though you already have Mac Jones on the roster, and even though there was already talent in the draft, I can understand why the Patriots went where they did with this pick. All right, we got some good reaction to the mailbag style questions we took at the end of last week's podcast. So we'll do that again here quickly. We've got a couple Zappe questions to start us off. ES, Def Not, ES2 says, does Bailey Zappe start week 1? That's going to be a no for me, dog. But at some point, will he start? There's certainly not going to be odds on that we could find anywhere at all. But I would say, given the Patriots' recent draft history, at some point, whether it's here in New England or elsewhere, there's a decent chance that he ends up starting somewhere. Looking at Jacoby Brissett right now, the kind of career he's put together is a 3rd-round pick for the Patriots. Obviously, Jimmy Garoppolo. Jarrett Stidham may be an argument against Zappe eventually turning into someone who starts a game somewhere, whether it's as a long-term backup a la Brissett, or it's potentially earning a starting job on his own. I wouldn't necessarily bet against that right now. We've got to see a lot more of him, but hopefully we do see a fair amount of him. The reps factor is going to be a factor for him. Mac Jones should get the vast majority of those in training camp, but we'll see what we can when it comes to these preseason games. These Patriots young quarterbacks have had pretty good preseasons over the last few years. Jacoby Brissett had one of the best preseason games ever right before he got traded a few years ago. He was not a rookie at that point, but Stidham a couple years ago, I thought had a better rookie preseason than Jimmy Garoppolo did. And Garoppolo had a very impressive rookie preseason. Mac Jones had an impressive rookie preseason. So will be fun to see what he can do in exhibition play. Dave Cherubin, our guy, Dave Cherubin, producer extraordinaire for NBC Sports Boston, checking into the bag saying, if Mac goes down, do you want Hoyer or Bailey in there? What's the correct answer today? Well, I would say the correct answer today, I could see why people would say it would be Hoyer. I think I would go with Zappe. I think Hoyer is valuable to what the Patriots are doing right now, but I think that value is mostly in what he does behind the scenes for them. And what happened in Kansas City is hard to get out of your mind a couple of years ago. And so that's what I would say is if Bailey Zappe can get by, I think it'd be okay rolling with Bailey Zappe. That's a good question, though. That's a really good question. Hoyer's the easy answer there, right? Because he knows the offense so well. And he should be able to talk about getting you into the right play. He should be able to do that. And that would probably be his greatest strength. Whereas Bailey Zappe might not be able to do that as a rookie. But in terms of actually making the right throws and making good decisions in real time, again, it's really hard to get that Kansas City game out of my head. I'm sure those of you listening at home or wherever you are feel similarly. So it's not a slam dunk either way as to that question. Next one. This looks like Data Kagami says, do you see Ty Montgomery making the team and any UDFAs that you think will make the team? I think for right now, it's hard for me to envision Montgomery making it only because they just drafted Pierre Strong in the 4th round and we know he's going to make it. And I don't know how many essentially sub backs you're going to have on this team. And that to me is sort of where Montgomery would fall. Now he does have the versatility to play receiver as well. So the Patriots will like that. And I honestly don't know what his potential special teams contributions could be. I think there are several return options who would get the nod ahead of Montgomery as the team is constructed right now, including a couple of really young players. And so all of those factors, as well as Montgomery's contract, just looking at his contract here now, 2 years, $3.6 million, but signing bonus is all that was guaranteed. And that was at $300,000. So certainly no guarantee for him to make the team. His 2022 base salary this year will be $1.16 million, next year at $1.36. He has some playing time incentives, but the guarantee there would tell you he's here to get a look. He's here to get a look. And so I guess I would lean no right now. And I would say, Pierre Strong would be a key part of that decision, but never say never, and injuries will change the deal. And if Ty Montgomery ends up being a key member of kick coverage teams, for instance, Bill Belichick acknowledged this week, I thought this was an interesting comment from him, that they're not necessarily going to value even those players as much as they did at one point in time because there just aren't as many of those plays anymore. So, the days of having Brandon Bolden and Brandon King and Nate Ebner and Matthew Slater and all of these special team specialists might be going by the wayside, even for Bill Belichick, which to me is significant. That would, if that's how it shapes up. But Montgomery could add to his value there if he ends up covering some kicks. And you mentioned any UDFAs that I think will make the team. My pick as of right now, I think I addressed this in a written mailbag earlier this offseason, but it would be Brandon Schooler out of Texas. Played some offense, played some defense, but he was a freaky athlete. Here's how he tested at the Texas Pro Day. So almost 6'2", 6'1.5", 203 pounds, 37.5-inch vertical, 10'8" broad, 4'4", 340, 4'1" short shuttle, very fast. And the 3-cone time was blazing, 6'7" 1 at 203 pounds. This guy's a great athlete. I don't know if he has a position offensively or defensively. But to me, he looks like the ideal kind of special teams candidate. He played special teams for the Longhorns. And so that to me would be a guy I would look at right now as being the UDFA to make it. But again, just talked about how Patriots may not value those pure special teams only guys as much anymore. And so maybe the UDFA who makes the team is coming from elsewhere. Maybe it's Cody Russi out of Houston, a center, smart player, everything you hear about him, going to grind for sure. And, maybe they're looking for the future at that spot, potentially. David Andrews was an undrafted guy himself at one point in time, coming from a bigger program at Georgia. And Andrews is here for 2022. And I think he will be for beyond that. But the interior of their offensive line is a spot that I could see them wanting to have a little bit more depth at. And so Cody Russi would not surprise me, but I'm going to go with Brendan Schooler for right now with that UDFA question. Okay, let's try to go rapid fire through these next few. Tim Dwight says it seems this can't be the Tim Dwight, right? Tim Dwight, unbelievable, former Patriot, just speed for days. Talk about big play, explosive play threat. If it is, I salute you, Tim Dwight. Respect. Just a lot of fun watching that guy play back in the day. Okay, it seems unlikely Pats roll into the season with 5 running backs, not even counting Montgomery or Taylor. Who is the running back most likely to get traded, and what type of value do you think they could get? All right, here's the running back group right now for your New England Patriots. Ramondre Stevenson, Damian Harris, Pierre Strong, J.J. Taylor, James White, and Kevin Harris. That is the group that is on Patriots.com right now for me as their running back core. Pierre Strong is going to be on the team. Ramondre Stevenson is going to be on the team. Damian Harris, I believe, is going to be on the team. James White, I believe, is going to be on the team. But we know what James White is coming off of. He's 30 years old. We did not see him at practice the other day. I think he's probably going to have to be managed to some degree this offseason as he works his way back into football shape and just back into, NFL life. And so there are a lot of question marks here. The one that I would think would get traded, unless J.J. Taylor ends up having some kind of a big preseason and they feel like they could get something back for him and they just don't envision a role for him. If you're asking me which of these guys is most likely to get traded, the name to me would be Damian Harris. It's going in the last year of his contract. Teams generally these days aren't throwing a lot of money for second contracts at this position because everyone knows at this position it's really difficult to sustain. It's just the nature of the job, unfortunately, for these guys. Damian Harris was a little banged up at the end of the year last year. They have a big back in Stevenson who looks like an every down player. The first practice we were at last week, I thought he maybe made the best catch of the day in the red zone. So we know he can catch the football. We know he can run. He can run between the tackles. We know he's a good athlete. Harris to me would be, and I'm not hearing anything at the moment in terms of them looking to deal Damian Harris, but I did talk to some folks during the offseason when the Patriots were looking at trying to sign Leonard Fournette. It was suggested to me that isn't something we should completely rule out as the potential for a Harris trade because of where he's at contractually, because he's somebody who would probably bring you something back in return. The Patriots just recently traded Sony Michel going into the last year of his deal. They get a little something back. And, now he's in LA and he's moved on with his career, but so have the Patriots. And so I'm not anticipating a trade with Harris, but to answer your question, that's probably the name I would go with. Damian, to be clear, Damian Harris, not Kevin Harris, who I'm not sure would make the team and to me would be sort of a practice squad candidate out of South Carolina. Okay, we have a couple more trade questions, but let's talk specifically about another position. Sox Nation 0613 says, do you expect one more trade this offseason, something more significant than just unloading N'Keal Harry? And then Wing Wang Badoodle, maybe my favorite name in the history of the mailbag. Thanks, Wang Wang Badoodle, for saying, how likely is it that Trent Brown is at left tackle and we're rolling without Isaiah Wynn into 22? Talked about this on the Patriots Talk podcast with Tom Curran. Did a little bit of digging on this particular topic since then. And what my educated guess right now would be is that the Patriots do not trade Isaiah Wynn and that he is at left tackle for the Patriots in September. Trent Brown is at right tackle. Cole Strange is at left guard. David Andrews is at center. And Micah Wynn is at right guard. Now, would I completely rule it out? The possibility of the Patriots trading Isaiah Wynn before this season? I would not, because it's the Patriots, and we've seen Bill Belichick do more quote unquote unlikely things in the past. But I would term it as unlikely for right now. And the reason being, it's just really hard to replace starting caliber tackles. And again, asking some folks around the league the last couple of days, because he is viewed in a certain light here in New England, and I think it's fair that he's been a disappointment based on his draft position, based on how much he's actually been available to the Patriots, based on the fact that he plays an incredibly important position, and yet you don't think of him as a core piece of the Patriots. I think the Patriots would probably have loved for the Wynn pick to have worked out in the same way. Obviously, Matt Light in the second round worked out. A core piece, maybe a captain. We haven't seen him develop into that kind of player for this particular team. Maybe in large part because of reasons that are out of his control, right? He's been so banged up. Maybe hard for him to morph into that kind of player. But it's so important a position, partly because it's such a hard position to find. And so even if Wynn has been a relative disappointment, I think he's viewed around the league, based on what I've been told, as probably anywhere from the 12th to the 20th left tackle in football. So average, on average. You might have a couple people who say, no, he's actually above average when he's on the field. You might have some who say, yeah, he's slightly below average, but he's right around that average label when he's out there. Even that's hard to replace, though. And even though you have Trent Brown, you could kick him to left. Now you're looking for a replacement to play right tackle. And maybe they could do it, and they could swing Michael Wenu out to right tackle and keep him there. And now you're looking for a guard, and those are generally easier to find. And maybe there's somebody on the roster that we don't even really think about all that much or know that well. And they end up looking like a true NFL caliber guard in training camp. And it makes that kind of trade an easier one for the Patriots to swallow. I just would say right now, moving him would put them at a disadvantage. You end up with probably a replacement level player starting at tackle, or you're kicking your right guard out to tackle and you're looking for a replacement at right guard. I think the best case scenario is that Isaiah Wynn stays healthy, plays pretty well, and you're paying him $10 million, which is a middle of the road kind of left tackle salary. So I think it's appropriate what he's making this year. And I think that's what's best for your offense. It's what's best for your quarterback. It gives you the fewest number of question marks when it comes to Mac Jones's protection in 2022. And he may not be here beyond 2022. But for this year, for this team right now, a trade would seem to make them worse. And so even though they could use the cap space, there are other ways to generate that. And I think right now, at least, that's how I would view them going about this offseason is not moving Wynn. But again, you never say never with the New England Patriots. Okay, last thing. Let's go to the depth chart, because we have Tua Tagovailoa, okay? Points for creativity there. At Tim Sunscreen 1 says, what's your best guess for the Patriots nickel D lineup for week 18? How about week 1? Can we do week 1? I guess if you're asking week 18, you're providing for the fact that rookies may have established themselves or developed to the point where they are starters. And so they may not be ready for week 1, but by week 18, they're there and they're in the mix. I won't go there just yet, but let's just go with week 1 for now, because I think this is still a fun exercise. Week 1, nickel defense. I think up front, you're going to have Christian Barmore and Lawrence Guy. I think Christian Barmore should be, listen, there's no defensive tackle anywhere that's an every down player, but he's good enough to me that when they're out there week 1, first snap of the game, that he should be out there. And so if you're in nickel, I'm thinking a 4-man front. I like Christian Barmore and I like Lawrence Guy next to him on the interior there. Right now for me, at the outside linebacker spot, you would have Matthew Judon, and I think you'll have Josh Uche. That's my guess for right now. We've seen him play on the inside a little bit. Maybe he ends up there, but I think it'll be Uche and Judon on the edges. Okay. On the interior, at linebacker, in nickel, it's interesting because nickel is essentially your base, but I'm going to say that you have Juwan Bentley, even though he's not thought of as a sub player. I think you'll still have him out there. And I think next to Bentley, I think the guy who's going to end up establishing himself as a key contributor at linebacker. He's healthy right now. He's experienced. I think he has both of those things over, he might have the health aspect over Raekwon McMillan, who's coming off a torn ACL. He has the experience factor over Cam McGrone. I think Mac Wilson could be the guy next to Juwan Bentley. So we've got Judon Uche on the edges, Bentley and Wilson on the interior, Barmore and Guy on the interior of the line. And so we've got 6 there. Now we get to go to our 5 DBs, our nickel defensive back package. And this to me isn't that difficult. But you're going to have Malcolm Butler at one corner and Jalen Mills at the other. That to me is the way this thing is trending. Then you'll have Jonathan Jones as your slot corner. And at safety, you have Devin McCourty in the back. And I guess the question would be, do you go Kyle Duggar or Adrian Phillips as the strong safety? I'll go with Kyle Duggar right now. And so that to me would be your 11 in nickel. Now, once you get into dime, then you can start getting a little bit more creative. Juwan Bentley comes off the field. You're going to see packages where Barmore is the only true defensive lineman on the field and Bentley's off the field. Maybe you've got packages where you have Jabril Peppers and Duggar at the linebacker level. Maybe even Adrian Phillips is up there. And you've got 6 or 7 DBs on the field at once because so many of them are so versatile and they can play in so many different spots. That's something that I think will be fun to track during training camp, especially during some of the joint practices. How do they match up if we're in Vegas and Josh McDaniels decides to go 4 wide? All right, so Jakob Johnson's off the field, but he wants to spread it out. He wants to let Derek Carr just deal. And he goes 10 personnel with 1 back and 4 receivers. How do they deal with that? I would call it 10 personnel, but Darren Waller will be out there. So I guess it will look like 11 technically, but Waller's a receiver. You have to treat him that way. Do you answer Waller with Kyle Duggar, or do you try to stick Adrian Phillips on him? Or does it have to be a corner? Do you have to bring Jalen Mills inside to deal with Waller? And then on the outside, because you want to have true outside corners out there, you also have Malcolm Butler and Terrence Mitchell on the field. So I just think there are so many different variations of how the Patriots can deploy certain packages, but that would be my nickel package for now, would be those 2 linebackers on the field. I think we could probably debate that one. To me, Bentley is not a great pass game player, but he's been on the field for a lot of nickel defense over the last few years. So that's where I would lean right now. Jonathan Jones back in that spot in the slot, Malcolm Butler and Jalen Mills on the outside. And then you can kind of tool with your front, however you would like. All right. Great questions from you all, as always. Really appreciate you. Please continue to rate, comment, subscribe. Let's grow this Next Pats pod as best we can. We're going to continue to try to bring you the best interviews we can, give you that content that you're looking for this time of year. We have mini camp next week, so we will have all kinds of mini camp takeaways. This is mandatory mini camp, 3 days in a row, June 7th, 8th, and 9th, where we will be able to attend the entirety of each practice. So we will have a much better feel for where the Patriots see their team and where they see their best players right now. And we don't want to overanalyze depth charts and starting groups in June, but that's part of what we can do. And we'll watch the offense obviously very closely. We will watch the coaching staff and how they're operating very closely. Are there any differences there in terms of how they've approached things? You know, one thing that I would just say that we didn't really get to on the Patriots Talk podcast is we reacted to the most recent Patriots practice. And this is Next Pats, and it's essentially a Mac Jones podcast, let's be honest. But one of the things that I noticed from Mac Jones was he was assertive, and he took charge at points. And there was one drill where receivers were working receiver combinations, and Mac Jones stopped the drill right in the middle of the thing in between throws. And he was basically coaching the receivers how he wanted a certain route run. It's something that I could see Tom Brady doing in years past. It's certainly not something that I would have seen Mac Jones do last year or Cam Newton do the last couple of years, this time of year. But he's the guy now, and he's going into his second year. And that, to me, you know, we've seen him chew out teammates at certain points in time, but in a relaxed, slow-paced, relatively slow-paced practice, which this one was. This was not a heat of the moment, correcting somebody, getting in their face, trying to motivate them, trying to tell them, hey, we can't have that in a situation like this one. This was, no. Like, guys, it has to be this way. Almost like a coach. You know, I thought that was just a 5 or 10 second portion of practice. But I thought spoke volumes as to where Mac Jones is at this point in time. We'll have plenty more of those types of observations coming from minicamp next week. So keep an eye out for that, and we will talk to you then. Until then, enjoy the finals, NBA finals. I know you guys are eating up all of our coverage on NBCSportsBoston.com. Continue, please, to do that. Listen to the Celtics Talk podcast. Chris Forsberg absolutely grinding away. He is going to be sawdust by the end of this thing, but I know he's loving it, and I know he's loving providing all the information that he is for all of you out there listening. So if you don't already subscribe to Celtics Talk, please go do so right now, and we'll talk to you on Next Pats next week.